Hello, welcome to How to Watch Birds. I'm Jamie. I'm just going to do a few little bits of housekeeping before we start. Now, as this is a Zoom webinar, you won't be able to turn on your video or microphone, but you will be able to ask us questions using the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. We have time allocated for questions and answers at the end of the session, but if we don't get to all the questions, we'll do our best to answer them after this event and we'll share them afterwards. We're also recording this event and we'll make the recording available afterwards too. There's no chat enabled for this event. If you have any technical issues, there is someone from the events team with us today who might be able to help, although for some Zoom related issues, we might not be able to offer any support. Now, on your screen shortly, you should be able to see some birds that you might find in your local park or wider countryside. For many of these, you won't need binoculars to see. This is just to give you a bit of inspiration. Now, as we go along, please do feel free to pop your questions into that Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer them. Amazing birds. It's amazing how much you can actually see just by going out and walking down to your local park. First of all, we're going to hear from Luke, who is on our youth council. And Luke is going to tell us what you actually need in order to go bird watching. Over to you, Luke.
Thank you, Jamie. Morning, everyone. My name's Luke. I am a naturalist and member of the RSPB Youth Council. I've been birdwatching for as long as I can remember. And the RSPB crew very kindly asked me to speak about the sort of equipment that you need for going birdwatching, what to wear and what to bring with you. And the truth is that when it comes to what to wear for birdwatching, it's really simple. And the basic bottom line is that you're going to be outdoors, so you need to be comfortable. So if it's hot, wear a cap, wear enough fabric to make sure you don't get sunburnt. If it's cold, wear a jacket. And if you're in a forest or somewhere marshy, make sure you're covered up enough to stop yourself getting bitten by mosquitoes. And the most important point with all of this is that if you are going anywhere in Scotland, you must have a waterproof with you at all times. And that's basically it. My key point for clothing is just be comfortable. Being inconspicuous is a fairly good idea. Normally wearing dark or neutral colors helps you to not spook the birds too much. But equally, I've put don't be silly, because I see a lot of bird watchers around wearing excessive amounts of camouflage gear. Now, this isn't, you don't need to wear camouflage gear to go bird watching. The birds will have other clues that you're there, and nobody thinks you look hardcore. Binoculars are your most important piece of kit for bird watching, and there's quite an array of quite a selection to choose from. And the key point here is that when you're choosing your binoculars, you're basically trading off between 4 different variables. You're trading off between zoom, image quality, price, and weight. And normally birdwatching binoculars are about 8 times or 10 times optical zoom. So that's 8 or 10 times more zoomed in than our normal eyesight. And they normally cost somewhere between 80 to 350 pounds. You can get a good starter pair for 80 to 120. And by the time you're getting to 200-300 pounds, you've got a fairly decent pair. The RSPB has a wide selection of binoculars to choose from and a really good website page on that. And I put some RSPB binoculars on the slide. I've also put my binoculars. I don't use RSPB binoculars. I use binoculars called Endurance by Hawk. And just to give you a sort of a benchmark, I'm a lifelong bird watcher. I'm really, really keen on bird watching. But my binoculars are only a couple of £100. So they're not, it doesn't cost loads if you consider that you're getting a lot of use out of these potentially for many years. If you're looking for something higher end, if you want to upgrade your optics, I would recommend investing in a telescope. This is for when you're getting a bit more serious, when you're getting a bit more into it. Key points for scopes, just briefly, is that you want something fairly small. You don't want to be having something too big to lug around. And be aware that if you're interested in getting a birdwatching telescope, you're also investing in a tripod, because you need both to be fairly good. Like I say, this is something for if you're getting a bit more serious, but it's actually something to think about as you go along your bird watching journey, because scopes are really useful for watching birds that are further away, particularly things like water birds. Field guides is another thing you will need to think about for starting out. And I think the key point for field guides for me is that illustrations are better than photos. In my opinion, there's a bit of differing opinion about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. I think illustrations are the best. And the RSPB guides are genuinely a really good place to start for beginner field guides. I put an example up on the top left. Really nice, clear guides to the birds of Britain. Really easy to use, really good place to start. If you're looking for something a bit more comprehensive, you're going to be doing a bit of traveling around Europe, or you're wanting something a bit more advanced, then the Collins Bird Guide is kind of the gold standard for bird watching. So that's something to check out if you're getting a bit more serious. And then the other thing that I was going to mention is notebooks. I really like notebooks. A lot of people upload their sightings electronically now, and that's great too. But I think having a notebook with me when I'm out and about not only helps me to identify birds, because it means that if I come across something that I find confusing or that I need help with, I can be writing everything down and coming back to it later. But also, I think it adds a lot of satisfaction to bird watching if you keep a diary of what you've been seeing, and then you can go back and look at all the great times you've had. So that's about it for clothing and equipment. My key points: be comfortable, find the pair of binoculars that is going to match the sorts of bird watching that you want to do, get a good illustrated field guide, and otherwise have fun. You don't really need any more kit than this. It's not a particularly expensive or equipment heavy hobby, so get out there and enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luke. That was brilliant. We did actually have a question sent in to us in advance of this event about camouflage gear. And you absolutely don't need camouflage gear to watch birds. Books as well, very interesting. We will be coming back to books right at the end. If you stay tuned, we've got a discount code that you can use in our online shop and some more books that we've got recommended. So moving on, now you know what you need or don't need for watching birds. What do you do when you're planning to actually go out bird watching for a day or for a few hours? We've got a little video to show you now. How do you get the most out of visiting a nature reserve? Well, first of all, find out what's been seen where, and then plan your trip. I like to look up on the internet first and see where I'm going. When does the reserve open? How do I get there? What facilities are there? Can I get a coffee? Is there cake? Yes, there is, and it's very good. But it's not all about cake. There are a couple more things to consider. First, look at the weather conditions, because those will affect the birds you see and what you need to wear. I'm going to put my gloves on, it's getting quite chilly today. Also think about the time of day and the time of year, because that's going to influence which birds are going to be around. But also things like sun. Look at where the sun is in the sky. You don't want to be looking out across a lake with the sun behind the birds, so all you see is silhouettes, because it makes them really hard to identify. And if you're heading to the coast, check tide times. Find out when waders on the shoreline or sea ducks on the water might be closer for you to see. Timing is also crucial on the shore for spectacles like this, big flocks of waders, or maybe geese coming in overhead. So we've planned ahead, we've got to the nature reserve. What next? Talk to the nature reserve team if there is one, and to other birders. Get the latest on where to go. You might want to keep a list of what you see, and why not share your sightings afterwards too. I've seen quite a lot today. There are lapwings and golden plovers out in a big flock in the middle of the water here. I've also been watching shovelers, shelduck and teal bobbing around. I have had a brilliant time here bird watching, and I hope you do too. Now that was filmed at RSPB Titchwell Marsh on the North Norfolk coast. Beautiful site, and a nature reserve that's celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Really good place to try out bird watching from a beginner to, well, an experienced birder. It's worth remembering, of course, that not every nature reserve you visit will have all those facilities. So do plan in advance and see what's around and what's available and what you'll need. We're going to head over to Belfast now to my colleague Aoife, who's at our Belfast Loch Nature Reserve, and she has some tips on Fieldcraft. Aoife, how's it going over there?
Hello everyone watching my how are you doing? I am grand. My name is Aoife, like Jamie said. I'm over here in Belfast. I am the warden of our Belfast Loch Reserves, and it's a gorgeous grey day in Belfast. Sorry, can you all hear me now? So yes, hopefully you've heard all that. My name's Aoife. I'm the warden of the Belfast Loch Reserves. Today I'm going to be talking about fieldcraft. And if I could put fieldcraft into a sentence, this is what I would say. It's putting the welfare of wildlife first. So, bear with me a wee second. So, fieldcraft is a bit of an art and it's a bit of a science. It's really knowing some of the behaviour of birds, some of the life cycle of birds and other wildlife, and knowing what to do to not only increase your chances of having an encounter with wildlife, but also to minimise any damage or any disturbance to wildlife. So my biggest number one rule, and I think this applies for almost any bird watching, is stand still. So the heron's a great example of a bird that could stand still all day. So have the heron in your mind when you're out bird watching, and these are a lovely big bird, and you can stand still and watch them, and they'll stand still and watch you. If you stand still, you have way more chance of attracting birds and other wildlife to you. So that also has the added benefit of decreasing the risk of stressing birds out or stressing other wildlife out. I know it can be very tempting when you see a bird off in the distance to start chasing after it. You're likely to scare the bird off. You're not likely to actually, if you're trying to get a shot in your camera, you're not likely to get a good shot, and you're likely to cause the bird stress. And you also really need to consider the time of year in this. We'll touch on this a wee bit in a minute, but especially if it's during the breeding season, that bird could be leaving their nest and you could be putting them off the nest. So definitely try and stay still, blend into the environment, think like a heron. If you can find a wee bit of cover, this person here is blending right into the tree line. So tree lines and shrubs are really good spots to kind of perch yourself, and they'll allow you to have a nice wee vantage point, find somewhere you're comfortable. And like Luke was saying with the clothing, you want to wear something that's going to help you blend in. So your positioning as well is going to help you blend in. Like I was saying, think about the time of year. Think about, are the birds breeding? Are the birds migrating back somewhere? We can see here this little lapwing is one of our winter visitors here at the Belfast Loch Reserves. So if I was going out on the reserve, I would want to be very careful that I'm not unnecessarily flushing some of these lapwing that have travelled big distances. Also the time of year. If it's cold, it's going to take more feeding for birds to build up their energy stores. So if you're chasing after a bird in winter, it could be quite detrimental to that bird. Time of year, we've got two beautiful baby blackcaps here. The last thing you want to do is to put their parents off the nest by, chasing after them. If you hear a bird doing alarm calls and it keeps flying away, that's a really good sign that bird is stressed out and it's time to stop and leave them alone. You might think, okay, grand, I'll just go keep my distance, I'll stay really still. One thing to bear in mind is, especially with wading birds like these black-tailed godwits, you can cause disturbance from up to a mile away if there's a clear view of the shore. So that's something to be wary of, especially with wading birds that are trying to feed at low tide. These birds, low tide may only last for a couple of hours, and that's their main opportunity to feed. And you might think, oh, if I'm coming along taking a few pictures, it doesn't really matter that much, they'll fly off and they'll fly back. But if other people are doing that over the course of an hour, you can see that that could be their whole window of low tide eaten up by that. So do try to bear that in mind when you're going out. The other thing is, if you find a rare bird, to keep the needs not only of wildlife in mind, but of local people in mind as well. So I put a barn owl here. They're a beautiful bird that's becoming quite rare in the north of Ireland now. And we had really delightfully a pair of barn owls nest in a local park in Belfast in Lady Dixon. And unfortunately, a lot of people got wind of this and they were so excited that the barn owls were there that they started going every day to see them. People started putting up ladders to try and get pictures of the nest. And eventually the barn owls left and they abandoned the nest and we had no chicks fledge. So try to keep the needs of local people and wildlife in mind when you're going out. And while this may not be part of Fieldcraft exactly, you want to be an ambassador for bird watching, and that means following any local rules of the countryside while you're there. If you're bringing your dog with you, picking up after your dog, keeping them on the lead when there's birds nesting. If people have questions for you while you're out bird watching, try and engage and try and answer and try and be friendly. Because when you are out bird watching, you do kind of become an ambassador for the hobby itself. And as with all things, practice makes perfect. And you're going to figure out, what works best for you in terms of where your position.
We might have temporarily
yourself,
lost Aoife there. Oh, you're still there.
Fabric, like Luke was saying, you don't have to wear all camo, but wearing stealthy and quiet. That's really everything. Go out and have fun, and try, not to overthink it. Sorry, I'll just stop my share.
Thanks ever so much, Aoife. That was brilliant. And I think the key thing to take away from that is the bird comes first. And you put the welfare and needs of the birds you're watching ahead of your needs to get a good shot or a good view. That was really, really interesting. We've had some good questions sent in actually, and one that came in via email was, where do birds go at night? Now I'm going to challenge our panelists. Does anyone want to answer that one? Where do birds go at night?
I'll go.
Hi, Luke Phillips. Luke Phillips, are you offering to answer? This is Luke from our supporter communications team. Luke, where do birds go at night?
It's really complicated, and I'm not going to dwell on it too long because I could spend half an hour answering that. But it depends on the species, to be honest. So very broadly, something like a blue tit may well go in a nest box at night, especially this time of year. They're starting to scout out nest sites, so they'll be in those roosting at night. But then you take other species, something like a redwing, which I've been seeing near me all winter. At night, they actually migrate. So they're really busy at night. And they're traveling, all over the country looking for areas where they might be able to find food. Species like ducks and waders, they can be often nocturnal. So they'll be out feeding on mud flats, dependent on the tide. So if it's low tide at night, they have to go out at night to feed on the mud. So yeah, it's a really fascinating, complex topic. So maybe one for a future webinar. So there we go.
I'll come back to that one, definitely. Thank you ever so much, Luke. And if you keep adding your questions to the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of your screen, we will endeavour to keep answering them. So there's quite a few questions and answers up there already. So do take a look. And if you've got a burning question in your head that hasn't been answered, please do pop it in there. I'm going to go over to my colleague Sara Humphrey now. And Sara is based on the England South Coast. And you don't really have to travel very far to watch birds. Sarah's going to explain why that is. First of all, Sara, how's the weather down there? Is it nice? Lots of birds around, I hope.
Hi, the weather's quite grey today, but there's definitely some house sparrows eyeing up the feeders on my balcony at the moment, which is fantastic. This is what my local landscape looks like. So this is the south coast of Eastbourne, just outside my main town. But what I'm going to focus on for you today is a bit more of the urban birding. So here you've got a beautiful wide open landscape that lots of people visit every year, and you get loads of migratory birds flying through, like this swallow that you can see in the foreground. But actually, you really don't need to go very far at all to start with bird watching. So all the photos I'll be sharing in the rest of this presentation are birds that I found in the urban areas of my local landscape. So that's things like local parks, local green spaces. If you're in a really busy built up environment like Birmingham, you might want to look out around canals, for example. You can find so much nature on your doorstep once you start looking, and you might be really surprised about what you can find. So this is a greater spotted woodpecker. This is one of the easiest birds to be looking out for in local green spaces at this time of year, because they make such an incredible noise when they're drumming on those trees. It's quite hard to see them if you're just using your eyes, so listen and learn. And Lucy will be giving a bit more of a talk on the sounds that birds make later. But these are one of those birds that once you find them, you can quite easily see them just by following that sound. And they are quite vocal and they are quite visible at this time of year. So for these type of birds, you'd be looking around woodland areas. You might also find nuthatches, tree creepers, sparrows, starlings. Even at this time of year, you might find wintering chiffchaffs in those environments. To choose your local patch, I would highly recommend trying to find somewhere with water, and that can be any different type of water. So you might be looking for a local pond, a stream. As I said, a canal can be a really good place to find wildlife. And the reason I would say that is because water will attract so many different types of birds to that area. Lots of things will need to come down and bathe and wash and drink. And it's just like a real hub for wildlife. So if you want the best beginner's bird watching experience on your local patch, I'd really recommend finding a local water source, sitting down patiently and waiting and observing what arrives. This is a little egret, which I can find in my local area, but you will find all sorts of different water birds and other birds in those urban pockets of water, because that's what they're looking out for when they're moving through the environment. And the more you look, the more you will see. So I know there was a question earlier that came in around kingfishers. I'd really, really recommend spending a lot of time kind of getting to know your local patch before you go out and look for birds in the wider landscape, particularly if you're a beginner. And what you'll find is that on your first couple of visits, you might notice the more common birds, but as you start to get your eye and ear in, some of the more unusual and the quieter species will start to stand out. So as you can see from this photo here, this kingfisher is actually perched right outside somebody's house. It's fishing in a local drainage ditch, and it's really regular there. So it'll be there fairly frequently if I go down looking for this kingfisher. But because they're so stealthy and so quiet, it does take a little while to kind of notice what's hiding in the undergrowth and what's perhaps a little bit quieter in your landscape. I'd really say that urban environments can be just as wildlife rich and wildlife varied as some of the wilder places. And because they're such smaller landscapes, you can kind of take in a little bit more of what that wildlife's doing. They're often more used to people as well. So it can be a great way to learn and to study wildlife before you try and find it in the wider countryside. And there's huge benefits to local bird watching or patch birding. So this is a buzzard sat on an urban rooftop. There's some really surprising things that you can find in your local landscape, and you don't need to spend an awful lot of money. I mean, you can literally just walk out of your door and find a green space to start enjoying nature in this way. Often with urban bird watching or patch birding, you don't need binoculars or expensive optics because it becomes just a part of your way of life. And the reason I've included this buzzard is because one of the most incredible urban birdwatching experiences that I had was actually walking home with my hands full of shopping bags from the local supermarket, hearing a commotion and then seeing a sparrowhawk kind of sat at the bottom of a bush with a starling in its grasp. And it just takes your breath away sometimes. There's close encounters you can have with nature without needing to travel too far, without needing to spend an awful lot of money, just in your local landscape. And the bonus of local birding is also that it's a really environmentally friendly way to birdwatch. It's not spending lots of money on traveling in cars, and kind of it keeps your carbon footprint low. So I do most of my bird watching, low carbon, just because that's how I want to help protect my local environment while I'm enjoying nature. And the other thing that I would say about local bird watching is that it's a really great way to connect to your local community. And I know Alasdair is going to be talking about things like local groups shortly. So if you are locally bird watching, it really is worth kind of talking to people in your local community, finding out what's about, and building up that knowledge, because you'll find that a lot of people really like having a chat about nature and are casual bird watchers, even if they don't realise it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I've got a question for you. So I think for a lot of people who live in particularly urban areas, it feels kind of really grey and built up and just glass and steel everywhere. You can still see stuff by sort of looking up and around you, can't you?
You can. And actually, when I was in London working from an office not that long ago, I had a bit of a competition with some friends about what we could see just from the rooftops. And I've done the RSPB's Big Garden Bird watching from the rooftops before as well. And in London, you'll see things like peregrines, and I've even had yellow wagtails. So there's grey wagtails. Those bright yellow birds with the grey backs will quite often be like flitting around the rooftops and potentially picking up insects from the gullies. And you can find so much more nature than you ever realized just by paying a bit of attention, particularly in those urban landscapes.
While you're there, I've got another question.
Go for it.
So someone has emailed us in. I'm going to read this one out. This is an interesting one. So this is Peter Raffle, and he says, where do birds go to die? Because he never sees dead birds anywhere. I think there's an easy explanation for that, isn't there?
Oh, so obviously birds do die, and it is very sad. But it is part of the natural way of life. And even though I spend a huge amount of time in nature, I don't often see dead birds. The one time that I have seen it, there was another bird, a carrion bird, that was swooping down and taking advantage of that. And I think it's really important to remember that nature is its best cleaner. They will make use of everything, and those unfortunately deceased birds often end up being part of the food chain, or if you look at the cute example of long-tailed tits, they become part of another family's nest. Long-tailed tits use lots of remaining feathers to build their nest, and that is just how things carry on existing.
Nature wastes nothing. You mentioned Alasdair earlier. We're going to go over to Alasdair now. Now, Alasdair is our local groups development officer, and it's really interesting that if you start getting into bird watching, a brilliant place to go is a group of local like-minded people who can inspire you, who you can learn from. And guess what? Those people are out there waiting for you. Alasdair.
That's absolutely right, Jamie. I was joking earlier before we started that my technique for finding birds is to go with people who know more than I do, and then wait for them to spot them. And it's very effective if you're lazy and slightly short-sighted like me. I'd like to talk to you about how you can get to meet some people that you'll be able to share your interest in birds with, and who will be able to help you to learn more about it. And that's through our RSPB local groups. Now, these are our voice in the community, really. We have these groups all over the country, and they go out and do all sorts of things for the RSPB just as volunteers. They've been going since 1969. The first group started over 50 years ago, and they've been going from strength to strength since then, and involving more and more people with nature. Now, to give you an idea of where they are, we've got over 130 of these local groups in the UK, starting all the way down in Guernsey, in the Channel Islands. We have a group. We have a group right up in Inverness. We've got groups over in East Anglia, we've got groups out in Fermanagh and in Northern Ireland, and all points in between, groups in North and South Wales, so all over the country. So there's a good likelihood that you will be able to find a group somewhere near you. Now, to give you an idea, a quick rundown of what they do. As I mentioned, they've been going for over 50 years now. And when we celebrated that 50th anniversary in 2019, we did a bit of adding up, did a bit of statistics, and realized that our local groups, in addition to going out and seeing birds and being involved with nature, they'd raised over £25 million for our work to save nature and support nature. They'd given over 12 million hours of volunteering. So they're a huge part of our workforce here at the RSPB. And in that time, they'd led over 120,000 guided wildlife walks. And we'll come back to that in a moment, because that's where they really contribute to your birding experience. They've also held over 80,000 indoor meetings, so a chance to go along, meet people, have a talk, learn a lot more about birds and all sorts of other aspects of wildlife and conservation. And on top of that, they go out and they talk to people about our work and about wildlife. They work on their own conservation projects. So they do some amazing work. But for the time being, what we're really focusing on is birding with local groups. Now, the first thing I want to emphasize, I think when people see, oh, it's the RSPB, I'm not an expert, I can't join that. It's the absolute opposite. The idea is we want people to come along who want to learn, who want to find out more about birds. And one of the best ways to do that is go with people who already know. And most birders, you find, are delighted to share what they know with people. So a lot of our groups will actually run special sessions, birding for beginners sessions, walks and events aimed at newcomers. But on the regular trips that they run, they will also have birding buddies. There'll always be somebody there that will be able to help you out if you're new, to talk about binoculars, to talk about birds, to talk about whatever you need to know. A huge amount of experience there. And most of the groups have regular birding walks and trips. Some of them will be quite local. As Sarah was saying, lots of groups go for that patch birding and they cover their own local area with short half-day walks. Others will actually have trips. We'll take coach trips to reserves and more far-flung places. Some groups go even further. They take to the sea and run cruises. We have cruises taking place down in Exmouth. We have cruises at Bempton on the cliffs there for the seabirds in Yorkshire. We even have a cruise on the Mersey Ferry a couple of times a year. We take 300 people right out into Liverpool Bay, and they see the wildlife that's there in the heart and around a huge city, which is a fantastic experience. And the talks that the groups hold are a chance to learn much more. We get some very interesting speakers. We've had groups having live Zoom talks from the Falkland Islands and from the United States. We even had someone give a talk from Australia live, and then they took a camera out into the bush and had a little bird watch round the Australian bush. So that's not really local patch birding, but it was a very interesting event. So really lots of ways you can get involved and learn a lot more about birding through the local groups. So they will help you to find birds. How do you find them? Well, you can find them through our website, rspb.org.uk/groups, or just Google RSPB local groups and you'll find them quite quickly. And you can go along, join one of the trips, go along to one of the meetings, get involved that way, or even better, volunteer and help. If you have some expertise, if you're learning about birds, but you already know a lot about plants or mammals or something, then groups would love to have you along to share that experience. So it's a wonderful way of sharing your experience of birds with other people, of learning more, of teaching them more, and just a really lovely communal experience to go out and share that. There's nothing quite like seeing something unusual and being able to say to someone, hey, look what's over there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alasdair. That's brilliant, very inspiring. I've got a quick question I'm going to ask to our RSPB ambassador, Lucy Lapwing now. Lucy, hello. We've had a couple of questions in about binoculars and glasses. So people are finding it difficult to use binoculars when they're wearing glasses. Can you explain?
Yes, it can be a nightmare. So when I first started bird watching, I was doing this whole trick. I was wearing my glasses and going whoop, whoop, trying to see birds. The best bit that changed it for me is most binoculars have eye cups that you can wind in and out. So if you keep those eye cups all the way down so they're as flat as possible, when you're using the glasses, that distance between your eye and the binocular is basically what the eye cup would create if it was wound out. So if you have it down flat and wear the glasses, you can see a lot more clearly and you get rid of those annoying black vision. So yeah, that works really well for me.
So I often used to drag my husband out bird watching, and he wears glasses, I don't. So we were constantly passing the binoculars back and forth, him folding the things back. And obviously the answer was to buy him his binoculars for his birthday. So sorted. Thank you so much, Lucy. We'll come back to you in a bit. We're going to head over to Jo Taylor now. Jo is our Learning and Visitor Experience Officer at our Ribble Discovery Centre. And she's going to tell us about the basics of identifying birds. Over to you, Jo.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm at RSPB Fairhaven Lake on the Ribble Estuary in Lytham, and we've been looking at where to go, maybe what to wear. So we're going to just have a little look at some simple bird identification tips here. So the first thing that I'd think about is habitat. Lisa, is the PowerPoint on? So the first thing you look at is habitat, basically. There are lots of birds that may inhabit a diverse range of locations and habitats, really, whilst others might occupy a quite narrower niche, and they might be adapted to occupy that niche, really, as well. You'll find that will limit their range somewhat. So, for example, we're never going to find a bearded tit on your garden feeder or a razorbill at your local park. So once you've established the sort of habitat that you're looking at, I would say that the next thing you need to be looking at is the size of the bird. So if we look at the next slide, I would advise you to choose a bird that you are quite familiar with, that you know the size of roughly in your own head. So if we look at the first one, we've got a starling. That's a really great measure to compare other birds against. And the next one, the sparrow, again, it's probably a bird that most of us are familiar with. For that smaller bird that you might see, it's a really good comparison. And then if you've got a bird that's a little larger, I would suggest something like a crow, really, in order to give a good size comparison. Okay, so you've looked at your habitat and you've looked at the bird size. So the next thing I'd be looking at really is the bill or the beak. It doesn't really matter whether you call it a bill or a beak. The terminology is not really important, but it's the size, the shape and the colour of the bill that is the thing you need to be looking at. So if you look at the first bird, for example, we've got a robin. And robin has quite a thin and pointed beak. It's great for picking up insects and invertebrates off the ground and out of the nooks and crannies and things like that. The next bill we're going to look at is the bill of the greenfinch. And as we can see, it's quite chunky, it's robust. It's great for cracking open seeds and nuts and things like that. Does your bird that you can see have a hooked bill, like a raptor's bill, for example, great for tearing open that flesh? Or is it a curved bill, a long curved bill for probing down into the ground? Okay, so if we go to the next slide, the next useful feature I'd be looking at really is possibly legs. It can be a feature that can help you differentiate two birds. If we look at the birds that are on the screen here, to all intents and purposes, they look really similar. They're in a similar sort of habitat, they're a similar colour, they've got a similar beak size. So the next thing to look at would be the legs. And if we look at the bird on the left has clearly got black legs. The bird on the right has clearly got pink legs. Now, I've been out in the field, and if either of these birds were to call or sing, then it would be really easy to work out what they were. But I'm not going to talk about that because I know that Lucy's going to touch on birdsong later. So it's the legs in this case that are going to help identify these two birds. The one with the black legs is going to be a chiff-chaff, and the one on the right with the pinker legs is going to be a willow warbler. Now, if you were to hear a peep out of them, it would make it so much easier, but they don't always play by the rules, and they don't always do what you expect them to do. So that's what I would advise for birds that are looking similar like that. And also, I would also say that might be the case for 90% of the time. There are obviously exceptions to the rule, but in that case, I think that would be the key feature that I'd be looking at. Okay, if we go to the next slide, legs can also help us identify what something isn't. So when you're out on the estuary, and I have been a number of times doing guided walks, and both of these birds at quite a distance away, if you're unfamiliar with them, can look quite similar. So the key defining feature again here is the legs of both of these birds. So the bird on the right with the red legs, there's only one bird really that you're going to see commonly in large numbers out on the estuary. The red legs define it as being a red shank, basically. So it means that the bird on the right that does not have the red legs is not a red shank. So not only is that bird not a red shank because it does not have red legs, that bird is actually a knot. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. So we've done beaks and we've done legs. So we're now going to look at the other defining features of the bird. Now we could get quite sciencey on this, talking about the topography of the bird, but there's really no need to. It's really looking at those key defining features, the simple features that you're going to see. So it's time to take notice of the colour of the plumage, any patterns that are on the plumage. Does it have a particularly bright outer tail feather or a bright flank? Does it have a scalloped maybe, or a streaked mantle? So this is the time then to look at the other defining plumage features of the bird. Okay, the next slide is a little bit about the time of year. And I know that's already been touched on a little bit, but time of year can be a really, really important factor when looking at birds, because some birds don't spend the whole of their life cycle within a particular habitat, or even within the country, basically. So if we look at the two birds that we've got here, the grey wagtail on the left, during the winter, may very well move into a more urban environment. Now, people seeing this grey wagtail for the very first time may mistakenly identify a grey wagtail as being a yellow wagtail. But if it's a winter time that you're seeing this bird in this urban environment, it's not going to be a grey wagtail, because the yellow wagtail, it's not going to be a yellow wagtail, sorry, because the yellow wagtails will be in Africa at this time of year. It is going to be a grey wagtail. Okay, now when we've done that, we'll have a little go at seeing if we can work out, using some of those features that we've just talked about, if we can work out what the bird on the next slide is. So if we take a look at this little bird and we work our way through those little filters that we've just talked about, the first thing to talk about is the habitat. And the habitat of this bird is a scrubland habitat, with gorse bushes. Now, gorse bushes are a quite defining feature of the habitat that this bird will be in as well. And if we look at the size of the bird, we'll say it's quite similar to the size of a sparrow. It might be a little bit smaller. Okay, the next thing to then look at is the beak. It's a quite short and chunky beak. It's a grey, chunky, short beak. So it's the bill of a seed eater, basically. And the next thing is its leg colour is that it's got pink legs. Now, if we look at the defining features of the bird, we can see that it's got a grey crown and a grey nape. It's also got a brown kind of streaky mantle. It's got a pink and crimson chest. And it's got black wingtips. Okay, black primary wing feathers. So all of this points to this bird being a linnet, and it's a male linnet at that as well. Now, it might not be in full breeding plumage just yet. If it was in full breeding plumage, it would also have a pink crown, a pink blob on the front of its head as well, on its forehead, and the pink on its chest would be slightly brighter. Now, if it was a female linnet, it's a different kettle of fish again, because they have a slightly different plumage to them. Okay, now, where's the next thing to go? What do you do next? How do you work out where would you go if you see a bird? So there's a couple of things that I would recommend. The first one is the RSPB bird identifier. Now, this bird identifier goes through the key filters that I've just talked about. So if you have all those things ready to hand, you know, your habitat, your beak, your plumage, your leg colour and things like that, it will help you go through those things one by one to get to the point of where you can identify the bird. The next thing I'd recommend is the RSPB Pocket Guide. This is a great compact field guide. It's great for sticking in your rucksack and great for taking outside with you. And then the last thing I'd recommend is the RSPB Handbook of British Birds. It's a slightly chunkier book. It's got a few more birds in it, and it's a great reference book for having on your bookshelf at home. So there we go. The only thing to say now is to go out and enjoy it, enjoy identifying, and just enjoy the birds as well.
Thank you very much, Jo. I would make the point at this point that you don't have to identify everything you see in order to enjoy it, but it's nice, isn't it? It adds to it. And another way to identify birds is by the sounds they make. So we're going to go back over to Lucy Lapwing, our RSPB ambassador. Lucy, how can we start to learn birdsong?
Hi, thanks, Jamie. I'm just going to load my presentation. So it's a world that is absolutely fascinating to me, and something that I only went on a journey to learn as an adult. So I've gone from song to knowing quite a bit now. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but it's just a really joyous pastime for me, and I think it's something that lots of people can get a lot more of. So what I'm going to do today is just cover a little bit about how to go about actually starting to learn birdsong. We're at the right time of year for it now. It's perfect to get going. And then I've got a couple of little lessons that I'm going to go over as well, so some birdsong basics for you all. So first of all, what's actually classed as birdsong? Birds make all sorts of noise. So we've got the traditional song, what we tend to think of when we say birdsong. We've got calls, and we've got random other noises as well. So I'm going to cover these a little bit. Now, song is generally the longer noises that birds make. So it tends to be a little bit more complex and drawn out. It's those noises that we hear that tend to go something that's quite layered, so more complex. And the other thing is that it's the context as well. So something is defined as birdsong when it's in a certain context, largely courtship and territory as well, defending territory. Should I? Ooh, I don't know where that's gone. Call birds are generally shorter noises, so it's little chips and little quite loud short noises. These tend to be contact calls, so it's either two individuals of the same species communicating with each other, or it's alarm calls. So there's trouble in the area, perhaps a sparrowhawk's on the prowl, and you want to let everybody know that there's danger about. And it's also the noises that the baby birds will make in a nest as well. So those baking calls that prompt mum or dad to eat them. And then the other noises, these are non-vocal noises that birds make. So many of you have probably seen the glorious sight of a mute swan flying over your head, and you hear those creaky. Now that's actually used to form a contour, even though it's not a vocal noise. Another famous example, obviously, being snipe as well. So snipe have two little feathers either side of their tail that make that amazing drumming noise as they fly through the air. Why do birds sing? It sounds like an obvious question, but it's actually quite complicated. So one of the reasons is that it's a display of territory. So it's developed as a means of saying, this is my patch, this is where I'm in charge of, you better stay out. And it's also courtship as well. So this is about attracting a mate, attracting a female, because it's largely male birds that sing. Very few species of songbird actually have a complex song in the female. So it's very much birds either trying to attract a female or say, keep out of my patch. Now there's some really good to delve into birdsong. The first one is a website called xenocanto.org. I think my internet might be a bit sketchy. Hopefully you can still hear me. This is a website that's amazing. It's a global database of birdsong. So you can look up any bird in the world within reason and listen to recordings from all over the place. So here I've looked up the great tit. You've got recordings there from France, Belgium, Norway, all ones from Britain as well. So you can compare lots of different variations within birdsong and in different contexts as well. RSPB is also a really useful website because they pull birdsong from Xenocanto and they have it on a web page with all of the information about that species, including an illustration as you can see and listen to it at the same time as you're learning about them. And one of the best things about our modern age, always glued to our phones, but this is a really useful way to learn birdsong on the go. So there's a number of apps that you can get. This is one I use called the E-Guide to British Birds. Now these are paid for apps. I was answering in the comments about these, but it's so worth it because it's effectively a bird book in your pocket. It has all of the information about the species. It tells you, it's got illustrations. It tells you all about their ecology and how to identify them. And then it also has birdsong on top. So it's like a bird book with birdsong. And the best thing is that you can compare at the same time. So I could put a great tit and a blue tit next to each other, look at how they differ visually, and then play their birdsong at the same time and see how they sound different too. The top tips and tricks for learning birdsong is to start simple. Don't jump in at the deep end. My first foray into birdsong was in an ancient woodland in mid-April, which was an absolute nightmare for trying to tell anything apart because everybody was screaming and shouting and singing at once. So try and start as slow as possible. This time of year is good because we've not had a lot of migratory species return yet. So it's all of our resident species, the ones we're most familiar with, who are singing in places like gardens and parks. Birds. Start with the earliest singers. So my blackbirds in my garden started singing about 3 weeks ago now. which has been joyful. And it's also best to start with just one block. So the ones that you're going to encounter everywhere, the ones that are going to be singing before everything else arrives, and the ones that sing the loudest that you're going to notice the most. Tip number 2 is to practice. I can't emphasize this enough, but it is kind of a skill. Like anything, it seems overwhelming at first. So one thing that really helped me was when I had a particular bird that I wanted to learn its song, I would set it as my phone alarm or my ringtone. And every time my phone went off, I would hear that bird. Now, it does have a bit of a Pavlovian response backwards, because if you do go out into the wild and hear that bird, you sometimes find yourself reaching for your phone. But it's really helped me with some tricky species, things like red starts and tree pipits, which you don't always encounter, and it's very easy to forget them each year after they've migrated back. So that's a really good tip. And to try and watch and listen to the birds simultaneously. So if you hear a bird singing, try and locate it if you've got your binoculars, and to see the mouth connection with the bird as well. And it's just beautiful to watch. It's a treat. So finding your own style of learning as well. So I tend to find funny little ways of remembering birdsong works best for me. So little rhymes or comparisons, it just helps if there's something a little bit silly in your head, because then you remember it more than very serious learning. So we're going to do a couple of lessons. So first of all, I'm going to cover the blackbird. As I mentioned, he started singing a few weeks ago. Now, blackbirds are birds that start, really quite early, the first inkling of spring. Most familiar songs. They're definitely one of the top bird songs. They're absolutely gorgeous. So when you hear a blackbird singing, you're listening for a really deep, melancholy tone. It's kind of wistful almost, but it's really quite deep compared with a lot of other birds that are a little bit more high-pitched. They can sing at night as well, as the Beatles song goes. It's likely to only be one of a handful, and that would be blackbird, robin, or if you're really lucky, a nightingale, but largely it'll be a robin. And I like to think it sounds like an old man whistling. So I picture my granddad pottering around in the bottom of the garden, whistling away kind of mindlessly. It's just got that kind of tone to it. And when they sing for a little bit, and then they pause. And then they sing for a little bit, and then they pause. And that pattern goes round and round and round. So it's quite distinct once you get your ear in. So we'll just have a little listen. So gorgeous, the sound of summer. You can hear there that sing, pause, and then pause, and they'll just keep doing that again and again. Next, we're going to cover the robin. So this is probably the most familiar songster. Robins are always following us around. They're really nosy and cheeky, and their tone of their song is really sweet and lovely. It's much more high pitched than the blackbird. And it just radiates sweetness. It's very cute, dare I say the word cute. They can sing throughout the night as well, and they actually sing most of the year. So robins you'll hear all throughout the year. The only time they really go quiet is when they're molting, because they're a little bit embarrassed that they're losing all their feathers. So they hide in the shadows. So in winter, their song's a little bit quieter, but they will sing nonetheless. And so I like to imagine that robin is the little kid following granddad around the garden, trying to imitate that whistle. It's got that kind of difference in tone between adult and child, is how I remember it. And they have a very similar structure to the blackbird. They sing, pause again. And so we'll listen to that. Pause. Gorgeous little noise. Listen a little bit more. Quite a jazzy one. So hopefully you can get that difference in tone between the blackbird and the robin. And finally, I'm going to finish on the wren. So the wren is a tiny ditty little bird, one you'll often see skulking in the shadows. But what it lacks in size, it makes up for in sound. So it holds the crown title of the most decibels per gram of any British bird. So they're really loud. And if you get close to one, it can actually hurt your ears a little bit. Very, very fast, very, very loud song. These are the two features you're looking for. They're kind of hysterical sounding almost. And the key feature of a wren song, when you know you're absolutely dealing with a rattle in the middle, it's a really distinct feature that once you pick it up, you can recognize it. So I like to imagine that a wren is a little wind-up buoy, and you've set it down and let it go. And it's got so much volume, it basically rattles itself out of control. And that's what the other people who imagine that it's got a tiny little machine gun, which when you see a wren's face, they do look very angry. So you could imagine with one of those. So hopefully you'll hear the rattle now. You get that in the middle then, it's like a brrr. Really, really distinct. So like I said, just going over and listening and practicing, listening and practicing. Once you've got one, you've got a building block and you can keep going and add more and more to it. So hopefully that's helpful. It does add a whole extra layer to your bird watching experience. Once you get your ear, notice how many birds are around, kind of like having a superpower. So I could be sat in a beer garden talking to my friend, and I know there's a nuthatch in a tree up behind me, nobody else does. So hopefully that's been useful, and you can go away and listen to some birdsong.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucy. And we did have some questions sent in about listening to birdsong and identifying birds by song, which I think that presentation has more than answered. If you couldn't quite hear the birds when Lucy was playing them, do go onto our website and you should be able to find them on there and hear all the sounds. Now, here are some great books that you can find in our online shop. We've got a little slide that's going to pop up for you in a second. We've talked a little bit about the books so far. Joe mentioned them and Luke mentioned them. Here are some really good ones. There is the What's That Bird and the Everyday Guide to British Birds, plus the Collins Garden Birdwatcher's Bible. Now, if you spend £20 in our online shop and use the discount code DELMAR, DELMAR, at the online checkout, you'll get a 20% discount plus free postage and packaging, and that offer is valid until the 14th of March. As you will have seen in Notes on Nature, there's an amazing new nature TV series coming to our screens very soon. We're really excited about Wild Isles, which the RSPB co-produced. Keep an eye out for more details in Notes on Nature over the next few weeks. We'll also be running a series of online events themed around some of the subjects in Wild Isles, so don't miss those. Now, we're about to finish, so I'd like to thank everyone, all our speakers who took part today, plus Sean, John, Luke, Lisa, Hayley and Claire, who worked very hard behind the scenes, answering lots of your questions, which has been great. And thank you all so much for dialing in. Hope you enjoyed it. Please do get in touch via our email notesonnature@rspb.org.uk and let us know what you thought, if you'd like us to run some more and what kind of topics you'd like us to cover. Thank you very much. Goodbye.